I will be showing you how to maintain a Zeiss Standard microscope nosepiece in case yours is difficult to operate due to old hardened grease. This particular nosepiece is from a Zeiss Standard Photomicroscope I, but the procedure is very similar for most of these Zeiss microscopes. Most likely you will have a microscope that is similar to the one in the picture. We start by removing the first screw. It is important to note that this screw has a left-hand thread. That means in order to remove it, we have to unscrew it clockwise. After its removal, we are greeted with a special nut that either requires a very wide flathead screwdriver or a special tool which is most commonly used for camera lens maintenance. I have a custom tool for that, but I will link several options in the video description, including the one I am using. After its removal, we are greeted with the first ball bearing that is held in place by a brass ring. It's important to tightly hold the nosepiece or both halves will fall apart and you will be looking for all the metal balls. I always place the nosepiece in a container to prevent the ball bearings from getting lost. Glass is not optimal as the ball bearing tends to bounce around, so ideally you choose a container made out of plastic. We are now looking at both halves of the nosepiece and we can see the second, much bigger ball bearing that is again held in place by a brass ring. I place all the metal balls into the container and also remove the brass ring, which can easily be lifted. I also remove the small ball bearing and its brass ring. We can now look at both halves of the nosepiece. What we shouldn't forget is the last metal ball that is held in place by the indentation in the spring steel. This ball locks the nosepiece at the specified locking points. We remove it and add it to the other ball bearings. The ball bearings and brass rings will now be degreased using a petroleum distillate, often called white or mineral spirit. It is a common solvent and paint thinner found in hardware stores and much better than ethanol or isopropanol. After letting it sit for a while, we can see that the solvent already did a good job in removing most of the old grease. The brass rings will now get some additional scrubbing. I removed the old solvent with a pipette and washed the ball bearings with some fresh solvent. I swirl the ball bearings using the pipette to remove any remaining grease that is stuck. Both halves of the nosepiece will now also be cleaned with some paper towel and solvent. The place of the small ball bearing is cleaned as well. Everything is cleaned. Now it's time for relubrication. It's best to have a set of different types of greases to find the one that is most suitable for the job. I tend to use a thicker, rather stiff grease for nose pieces, as soft greases often turn a nose piece into a self-rotating carousel. In this case, I use the ML MFK2 from OsimOptik, which is a special grease for ball bearings. I'm just playing around with the grease here a bit so you can imagine the consistency. Now we simply lubricate everything generously. We insert the brass ring again, push it down and add additional grease. We can now start adding the ball bearings again. I use the same toothpick that I also used for the lubrication process. Due to the remaining grease, the metal balls stick to the tip and can easily be placed at the right spot. After the ball bearing is complete, it's time to lubricate the other half of the nose piece. Before starting the assembly process, I add an additional layer of grease on top of the ball bearing. We also add some grease to the outside and inside thread. It's also important to not forget the metal ball that is placed into the indentation of the spring steel. We now press both parts together while making sure to not move around too much to prevent the ball bearing from escaping from its assigned position in the brass ring. In case the ball bearings escape, you will have to separate both parts again and place the metal balls back to their position. The small ball bearing is now reassembled by adding grease, the brass ring and the ball bearing. We now add the special screw back in and secure it with our special tool. Depending on how tight you set the screw, you can adjust the smoothness of rotation of your nose piece. The final step is to add the left hand screw back in. And there you have it, a freshly maintained Zeiss Standard nose piece. I'm happy to take any questions in the comment section below.